Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Learning Impact 2021. This is Rob Abel, and I'm the moderator for our panel here, which is a discussion on the current and future directions for software that has maybe some different names, but it's the software that has been very valuable, I'd say probably invaluable, certainly during the pandemic and before the pandemic and after the pandemic, because it provides secure access to the launching of rostering of apps, for teachers and students, kind of a place to go, for them to get to all of those great apps that you're integrated with. And they can provide a whole wide variety of other features, depending on the specific product. It's a very important category of products that's rapidly evolving, and is a kind of an integral part of the edtech ecosystem within most districts. So we're here to talk about where are we now with these products, where are things going? What's the directionality of things, and particularly for what education leaders can expect to see from these products going forward. Really fortunate to have a super panel here of three leading product providers, ClassLink, Global Grid for Learning, and Identity Automation, and one highly experienced school district CIO. So I'd like to introduce the panel one by one so you can get to see who they are. First one is Robert Iskander, who's the CEO for Global Grid for Learning. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Rob. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Great to have you. Gavin McKelvey, Chief Marketing Officer for Identity Automation. Hi, Gavin.
Hi there. Great to be back with you, Rob.
And George Perreault, who's the Chief Academic Officer at ClassLink. Hi, George.
Hey, Rob. Good to be here.
And our experienced Chief Information Officer is none other than Lenny Schad, who currently is the Chief Information and Innovation Officer at District Administration of the LRP Media Group. Hello, Lenny.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for inviting us back.
It's great to have you all here. And we'd like to start off with a question that might be on the minds of some of the viewers. And, we're all very familiar with consumer app ecosystems, whether it's Apple or Microsoft or Google, what have you. And so maybe a really obvious question just to kind of warm us up here is, how are the app ecosystems we're talking about in K-12, for schools and in school districts different than those consumer app ecosystems? Who would like to take a shot at that? Okay, Robert, you're first up.
I'll do a bit of a primer. So basically, when you have an iPhone or a device like this, you're downloading an app from the Apple Store, it's a one-to-one model. It's a single user, we call it a consumer-centric model. And this application is turned on for you with your request. So it's easy. And you consent to releasing your data to Apple and all the vendors behind Apple. So it all works nicely one-to-one. When it gets to a school district with multiple schools and each school has multiple classrooms, when you try to provision an app at that scale, it really is a different level of complexity. It's one-to-many provisioning. So we're talking about, you have to decide if this application has to be turned on for a small subset within the district, like one classroom with each of a bunch of students, or it's a district-wide application. And when we talk about a district-wide application across all the schools, then we start talking about the roles. It's a student-centric teacher, parent, administrators, and what type of administrators and which type of classes you want to turn it on. So there's a lot of policies that you want to set up in the system to enable these access rights for the right people in your organization. So you have to be able to take what we call the roster data, which is actually the word roster is kind of also misconforming because it's not just now roster, it's really the full SIS data coming in from the student information system where it has all the relationships and all the roles. And so we know everybody who is a student enrolled in a class. This class is taught by this teacher, and this class is in this school within this district. So there's a lot of relationships and grouping you have to define in the logic. But the point is, when you do that, you need someone in the middle. It's sort of a middleware in the cloud that will take this data from the student information system and with the permission of the school and the IT department, be able to distribute that data or a subset of that data to that third-party vendor with some sort of a consent that you want to capture, so that you're making sure everything is legal and kosher. So this is at a high level complexity that in data integration, infrastructure, data exchange, and IPaaS, integration platform as a service, has to do at the core to get it started, to be able to provision an application within your ecosystem as a school, one-to-many. And I'll stop, and I'm sure others will add more to this.
George?
Well, I was going to say, and not only that, but I'm sure that everybody who downloads an app takes a very careful read before they accept these policies. Especially if you're using Apple devices. I'm sure everyone's reading the 27 pages that it says. And here recently, there's been some concern out there among the consumer market about just how much information is being captured, whether it be through, the Amazon Echo or whether it be through other devices. Certainly that's there, and school districts can't afford to just blindly agree to these things because there are privacy concerns associated with this, because it's not just your data. This is data that belongs to other people. This is data that belongs to the students. And as a result, you have to be very careful about who gets this data and what kind, and even if those of us in the middle, here at ClassLink, we have that, well, we don't have the data, the district servers have that data, and they're passing it on. Well, we're not doing anything with that data, but we don't have any control over what's happening once it reaches the endpoint. So it's very important, I think, from a privacy and security standpoint, that people are cognizant about, what are the privacy policies around these various apps, and training. You don't have to train anybody to accept, these things when you download an app, but you have teachers out there who are maybe enrolling kids online or sending off Excel spreadsheets in an email or things like that, and those are all very concerning, aside from what Robert indicated, which is the complexity around parsing all that data.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a, yeah, go ahead, Gavin, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So, adding on to that, great points about the security side of it. I'd also pile on the objectives are fundamentally different. The fact that a consumer app ecosystem is focused on primarily commerce, the purchasing of apps, as opposed to an edtech ecosystem, an application ecosystem that is focused on the productivity of a learning process. That requires, a level of interdependence of the applications. And George was even talking about not only the security side, but the flow of data across applications. It's a whole new level of sophistication when it comes to that interdependence across applications that are in that ecosystem that then requires a lot more from us, the folks on this call, and who we integrate with. It's a whole different ballgame. We use the same word, ecosystem, but fundamentally different.
Right.
Just before we move on, I agree with what all of you said, and just making sure the context is, and we do this for kids who are 5 years old, 6 years old, right? So this is from the pre-K all the way up to the 12th graders. And this is something that has to be easy and seamless so that we're not taking away from the instructional time that you talked about, Gavin, right? So there's a purpose and a role behind all of this. This has to happen seamlessly for a wide range of people with different skill sets. And then we add complexity of going home, where it might be going home to a grandparent or, to a brother or a sister. So the seamlessness of this integration and the interoperability, for me, is what makes it key.
It's almost like we're talking about standards.
It's it's I think we've the combination of all those comments are clear. Seems much more high stakes, in terms of the ramifications of the data moving around. Also, there has to be much more interoperability in order to make everything work seamlessly from the end. As Lenny, you pointed out, I mean, these apps within the school district enterprise are used at all times of the day and night as well, just like those consumer apps are. But the constraints and the importance of the controls and quality are much more important. So that's a great lead in. We're kind of like the trying to help the viewers understand what you believe, each of your organizations believes are the essential features or functions, right, of these platforms, which really are serving as really critical integration, platforms within K-12 school districts. And also anything you want to say more about the role of privacy and security here, but really kind of, what's the baseline for the functionality of systems like this that school district leaders should be making sure that they can get in products such as yours?
Well, I think since we're feeding some of these third parties, I think that school districts have to make sure that there are certain things that are non-negotiables. And in my experience in a school district, once the one roster format came in, we began building that into all of our various solicitations, that it was a non-starter if you didn't conform, because otherwise kids don't get access to, Halloween or Thanksgiving or something like that. So I think it's incumbent on school districts to help move the market by demanding that people conform to this, because we know that they're going to get the data they need, they're going to get it securely, and we're not going to give them too much data. So I think the school districts are the ones that can make this happen. By insisting that their vendors conform to these various standards.
Okay. And so rostering that's a key requirement. And the school districts can drive that because there are standards available for that. But what about other functionality that should be key to these product category?
Yeah, Rob, I think of three things mainly that are crucially important to include, and they're not always provided by just one provider. But the first is providing the best experience possible for the type of user. I know just using George and ClassLink as an example, just a phenomenal classroom experience. But there's what's behind the experience itself. It has to be a really strong authentication process. We got to let the good guys in and make it super easy to get in and keep the bad guys out. So that's authentication. That's number two. And then the third is a burgeoning area that is a huge one for us at Identity Automation, and that's managing digital identities as the core of a cybersecurity strategy, but also as a fundamental building block for personalizing learning. And I think if districts can really nail all three of those, the classroom experience, authentication, and digital identity management, I think that is just a phenomenal place to start.
Yeah, and I think federated IDs are the key there. We otherwise, because we're trying to avoid password bloat and the URL bloat. So I think secure federated type ID authentication, like LTI or OAuth 2, SAML, OpenID Connect, some of these federated type things that allow this to pass credentials in a secure way without having to have, as I said, password bloat.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, go ahead, Robert.
I was going to just say a quick thing about like when you do that as a school-centric model or district-centric model, obviously you have multiple data systems, enterprise applications you're integrating with. Typically, we integrate with the student information system, with the learning management system, and with the directory, the LDAP. So those are the three data sources we pull data out of or sometimes send data to. And we've got to be able to integrate with one or more at the same time for every district. And on the other side of the fence, of course, the edtech vendors who are integrating their services, their applications, being able to do that through very, very secure, standards-based APIs. And so that, so you're building this ecosystem, connecting the schools to vendors with a very, very seamless automation. But in many cases, you get involved in terms of what you want to do as an IT director. You want to be able to govern the release of that data because, they have too much data sometimes, and you don't want to give every vendor all your data. So data governance and data control in real time and being accountable to who's getting which data is really the challenging piece of all of this from an IT automation perspective, and being able to do checks and balances and compliance with all kinds of security and privacy laws. It gets complicated. It's a lot of plumbing. You could do it manually for 2 or 3 applications, which is really what district IT used to do in the past. But now a typical district is integrating anywhere from 50 to a couple of hundred applications in their ecosystem. The scale and the enormity, and also the complexity of privacy laws requires something in the middle to help streamline all of it.
So go ahead, Lenny.
No, Robert, I was perfect segue for what I was going to say. I think that when we're talking about functionality, there's technical functionality, but I think there's also people and process functionality, playing off of what you said, Robert. And I feel like a lot of districts out there are playing whack-a-mole when it comes to how they're managing rostering and interoperability. And I think districts have to take a stand back and say, existing support models, what do we need to tweak, right? Even though this is the way we've always done it, how do roles and responsibilities need to switch to become more agile, more flexible? And maybe we did this all before, but now it needs to be sent out somewhere else, and other departments need to have more ownership into it. I think we have to put lines in the sand as far as our standards, and they're non-negotiable. What I saw last year was a lot of exceptions because it was the pandemic, and we need this application because kids can't learn, even though it didn't match any of our standards. Those exceptions to that rule just force us to continue this whack-a-mole process, which is very expensive, very inefficient, and at the end of the day, we're impacting that learning time. So I think when we talk about functionality, we can't just look at the technical functionality. We need to look at the people and the process side of this as well.
That is awesome. Just yesterday, I was on a COSIN meeting with a bunch of CTOs, and the resounding thing there is exactly what you all are saying, and that is the role of the IT director, and how the role of the IT director has expanded. And no more can you just be the person who just says, no, that's the curriculum stuff, I don't get involved in that. I'm the IT guy, talk to me about the technical stuff. Well, to your point, Lenny, you have to be more involved with the processes that are going on in other departments, because all too often, we'll run across a district where the IT department is a department of no, we're not doing that. And as a result, you end up with all these shadow IT systems. So I think the role is changing of the IT director, where you have to be more consultative, and you have to be more willing to, bring other people into the fold, and have them bring you into their fold, as it were.
A change agent, right? I agree with you, George. It's more, we're playing more of a change agent leader than we are the bits and the bytes and the stuff plugging into a wall.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree with that. And it makes me think of the whack-a-mole reference that I think it was George that mentioned. Might have been Lenny, but another feature that's required is agility. I can't tell you how many districts I've spoken with where, let's say they've got whether it's a portal or something else that needs to plug into everything else, but it only plugs into 90-80% of what they really need. So having a system that can just plug into the additional applications as they come aboard, because you can never predict what next year's needs will be. That agility is extremely important.
Thank you for that discussion. The process, that's really fascinating to think about the intersection between the process, flows of the teachers versus the students versus the administrators. That's a great way to view what's going on here. I'm surprised nobody said anything about data analytics, like analytics on the usage of the products that are being rostered as a feature for these types of systems, because isn't that sort of an obvious potential feature? There are some other platforms that are emerging in the market that are sort of focused on that, but that fits into this category too, doesn't it? Anybody?
In a big way. That's why we just made an acquisition recently of a company called Backup and integrated this whole front end engagement, student engagement part, able to track basically what are the students doing on their devices, not only to logging in through traditional single sign-on, but what are they doing on the internet, on the school-issued device, being able to collect that data and produce all kinds of insightful analytics, things like exactly what are the special interests of that student in terms of categories, what is their reading level, are they at the same reading level they should be in their age group, how many minutes a day they spent learning online. One of the biggest problems schools had to face during COVID is tracking attendance, and being able to actually track attendance by the second based on tracking their activity on the device. It helps the school actually have evidence for attendance tracking. So things like that are really, really important to collect that data and analyze and provide insights to the teachers, to the administrators, and also in terms of validation of whether the applications are being used or not, et cetera. So absolutely spot on. Analytics is
Thank you.
really important.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah.
Gavin?
So adding on to that, attendance last year was huge, and we saw really quickly district leaders not be satisfied with just attendance, but how do we better understand the level of engagement, particularly when it came to remote learning, level of engagement and participation in class beyond just attendance. And that's kind of the holy grail. I think everyone's searching for it. And one of the big challenges with producing that is what we talked about earlier with respect to interoperability. A lot of times you either have not the right sources of data to get the analytics done, or not the right views from a particular provider to get it done. I think in where we are now, it generally is a suite of sources for analytics that are needed to really hit on all of the areas of analytics that districts need. But I think we covered quite a few of them as some of the comments so far.
Yeah, the holy grail, for this is efficacy. Based on a student learning profile, then which application or applications best allow them to progress, which is difficult. I mean, we certainly capture at ClassLink, we capture an awful lot of data around, how much time did they spend online, in which applications, how long did they spend in each application, and so forth. But it also helps the district make some financial decisions. In terms of, we purchased, X number of licenses of this particular application, and nobody's utilizing it, but we are seeing usage of a different app that seems to be, at least from a correlational standpoint. I mean, it's difficult to pull a causal relationship between student achievement and app use. But this is better than probably most data that we have now. This is data we didn't have access to. When I worked in the school district, I would get the call at 3:00 on a Friday that they need some data from something, by 8:00 Monday morning, and I'm running around calling vendors and what have you. So it's nice to be able to have it integrated, to have at least some data at your fingertips to be able to point to some of these issues.
So one little piece I want to feed off of this is I think when it comes to data analytics, data visualization, I think where we're at from a tipping point perspective is it's no longer good enough to have data visualization or analytics within these individual app ecosystems. The challenge we have now is, how do you create a data visualization that has longitudinal data from multiple ecosystems pulling it in, right? And that's where the interoperability really comes into play. And I think districts have a ton of analytics and visualization tools, but they're for the silos and the pockets. And now what they're struggling with, and George, to your point, is how do I look at time on computer, applications, assessments, student performance, to start pulling together the picture to say, hey, do we need an enterprise application for this, or is it for a subset of students? The only way you can do that is to create this comprehensive enterprise ecosystem that pulls from all of the individual silos. That's the 800-pound gorilla that I think districts are really struggling with right now.
Right. And you've got a lot of people who are attempting this, and there are some people who swear by, say, Microsoft Power BI, and then you've got, the Illuminates, and you've got a lot of these other companies who are out there who are purporting to do it. But if it were easy, it'd been done already.
Yeah.
And they're building the dashboards, on the fly. So it's certainly the holy grail. I agree 100%, that this is data that we're hungry for, but easy it's not.
Correct.
Is part of the challenge here that, there, and you, Lenny, you used the term multiple ecosystems, but I think maybe what you're talking about is there are multiple integration hubs, even in a single school district, right? There's the LMS, and LMS seems to be playing a larger role now than it was, say, 5 years ago, for sure. There's your types of products. There are some other products that, that are used, that sometimes there's multiple integration platforms within a single school district. So what about the LMS though? Let's focus in on that because that seems to be kind of a rising piece of the equation, and the link there seems to be more and more integral. So maybe talk about how you see the LMS fitting into the integration patterns that you're seeing in the trends, Robert.
Yeah, it's front and center. I mean, I think the shift now from the SIS being the center of the universe is moving to the LMS quite clearly. Being able to do LTI 1.3 based deep linking, two-way data exchange, where we could use the data in the LMS to provision a third-party application, then bring the actual granular activities and the results of these activities back into the gradebook of the teacher. That two-way data sync is really now core to that new world of integration. We're really getting deep into that. We're working with Google and Coursera and a few other players to actually deliver exactly that. And I think that is the beginning of the journey. The second piece of that, before we kind of we go back to the Holy Grail, is really getting all the vendors to open up their activity data and assessment data inside their own applications. So many of them kind of hold this kind of as a proprietary type of data that they're collecting, but being able to get all these content vendors to be able to share that data with a central data lake in the middle or data hub in the middle is going to be the next big challenge, getting everybody to play ball. And we're working with many vendors in doing that, but it's still at the beginning of that curve. But the two-way LTI integration LMS is something we could do today. Really easy.
Okay, others?
Yeah,
George?
I think I agree with what Robert says is getting people. I mean, I think back to my time at the school district when I was trying to get various vendors to give us the thin common cartridge, and what a struggle that was for them to understand the difference between dumping a bunch of PDFs into a system and providing discrete learning objects. So that's a stretch. And then when I spoke to somebody at a publisher, they were like, "Yeah, but our content is the best content, and it's designed to build on each other. And if you disaggregate it, it loses its value." And my response to that was, "Yes, you have you've got good stuff on." I'm going to say algebra because I was a high school assistant principal. You've got good stuff on algebra, but so do other people. And so if a teacher wants to build a lesson, they want to be able to pull from the various learning objects that meet those standards. And the only way we do that is through this thin common cartridge piece. Although I think there's a little bit of a struggle there where they want to make the LMS the central point of everything, because there's a lot of resources that don't necessarily fit well into an LMS environment, and especially if you're trying to impact teachers and other staff members inside of a school district. Like you don't want them going to the LMS to try and get access to the HR system, for example. So there's a lot there, and I know that we have quite a few districts that actually launch their LMS from our platform, because that becomes, of course, we want our thing to be the central piece, of course, but we have an awful lot of people who authenticate via our platform and then into the LMS. So that's sort of rambling. I'm sorry about that, but
no, it's complicated patterns there. That's what we're trying to talk about. So thank you, George. And I remember being on some of those calls with you when you were at Orange County, and you were convincing those suppliers to use the thin common cartridge. And that was thank you for your leadership there.
There was a lot of table pounding going on. It was like, what don't you understand? About this. And what I find interesting is, in talking to school districts, it's the same content that you would access, via authentication into their. So basically that content lives here, and you come in the front door or you come in through LTI, but they want to charge you to come in the back door, So that's I always had a problem with that.
Gavin?
Yeah. Rob, hearing these other gentlemen, talk about the roles of LMS, the thing that keeps coming to my mind is shifting. Everything's shifting. And the one thing that's guaranteed anytime you're talking about an ecosystem is we have to think of it like a living, breathing thing that's constantly changing. I think it was Robert who mentioned we also, it seems like we have to wait for everyone to sort of open up and let everyone else in. And we're going to be waiting a long time, I think, for if we're having to wait for that. I think together we've got to find a way to break through some of these barriers, and standards play a huge role in that. But we've also got to find other ways to break through and connect applications, regardless of whether someone's ready to adopt standards or not, help them find a path towards adopting standards, but also make sure that there's enough agility in the plan, regardless of where LMS fits in or any other, whether it's a SIS or anything else fits in, HRMS. How can providers like us help districts evolve? I think that's just absolutely huge. And it's also, one of the the premises that we operate in when we're working with districts is for them to talk to them about the role of digital identities as a source of the truth, so to speak, when it comes to bringing the data together for whatever purposes they might be using, whether it's the learning process itself or security or analytics. Those digital identities will be huge in terms of addressing the agility that, frankly, all districts will need moving forward.
Especially if you look at longitudinal type data.
Absolutely.
Right. Or even understanding the data that's coming from a number of systems. I think we talked about the each individual school district ecosystem is pretty complicated, right? That there might be multiple integration points they're not to mention that the district may be leveraging an app ecosystem from Google, right, or from Microsoft, right, or in some level that. So is the next frontier, kind of the architectures for this integrated data, the data lake, the moving from today's data warehouse to something much more scalable, agile, that can work across all these systems. It's very complicated, right? Because it seems like, one of the reasons One Roster succeeded is in a way, this category we're talking about right now, as well as like the LMS category, sort of grew up almost in a virgin, space between the SIS and these other systems, right? But when you're talking about data and you're talking about putting in a data infrastructure, yes, you can ask for standards from some of the newer products or whatever, but you've still going to always have plenty of legacy products. And for analytics to be important, you've got to collect data from all of the products. So just any views on where that whole evolution of the data architecture is going and the importance of standards, because those are the ones we haven't really talked about. IMS has something called Caliper, and it's pretty good for certain things. But the thing we're seeing is that, of course, it only works with those suppliers that are willing to, to use Caliper, right? And you're always going to have lots of legacy products in any ecosystem. But is that the next sort of thing that we need to cooperate on? It sort of sounds like it to me from what people are saying. But
the big thing is, and a couple of years ago, I was in an AWS event, and AWS was talking about data lakes. So what's a data lake? I mean, I know data warehouses and ODSs, but I never heard data lake. That was the first time for me. Somebody explained it. It's basically unstructured data. I mean, why do you have to constrain the data by structuring it? You could just store it unstructured and utilize it for transactions. That's when the light bulb came out. So Caliper is a great API to be able to pull data out of the vendor's system, but it doesn't tell you, for example, specific what structure do you want that data. And every vendor will probably have a different taxonomy, different structure, different schema. So being able to use something like Caliper and keep pulling data from all the vendors that have different data models is fine, because we could put them in a data lake, which is unstructured, and then put analytics tools and visualization tools on top of that would allow us to leverage the data lake model, which is an unstructured. I think that's the future if you were that.
Okay. So that's sort of like probably a major trend, is districts starting to move to data architectures along the lines of data lakes and so forth. And I guess another complicating factor is many of the organizations we talked about, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, you mentioned AWS, want you to move to want districts to move to their stacks, that support these things. And they are somewhat different in terms of their implementations. They can all support standards and all support different data formats, but somewhat. But anyway, George,
these
all start talking, or Lenny?
Yeah, go ahead,
Bob, these all fit. This all fits together, though, right? The LMS discussion. We have to land the plane on what are our sources that we're going to have, right? And so the LMS should be the learning hub. George, I agree with you. You don't go to there for HR, but what is going to be our learning hub? Where is the content? Where is the lessons? Where is the grades? Where are all these things going to be? And once we start establishing what our internal ecosystem is going to be, it's then that we can start doing, Robert, what you're talking about, right? Let's define out the ecosystem and where we're going to leverage the data, how we're going to leverage the data. But it can't be done by districts. Rob, You and I first met when HISD was trying to figure out how do we bring content providers, our LMS vendor, and us in a room and figure out what this roadmap looks like and what this journey is going to be, because not everybody can do it all at once. So we can't do this independently as school systems, but we have to have the vision of where we want to be. Then we have to bring in our vendors, our content providers to say, here is our vision, and that's non-negotiable. Help me paint what this roadmap's going to look like along the journey so I can have the right expectations. The one expectation that I'm not going to compromise is not doing this, right? And I don't think districts are having this conversation, which is why we continue to play whack-a-mole. We have to have fidelity to a vision and then have our partners and our content providers and our LMSs be along with us in this journey to help build the stair steps along that way. I don't think we're doing a good job of that right now, right? And I don't think we understand the interrelationships between all three coming together to help paint that picture moving forward. So it all goes together. You can't, it's not a la carte. We can't do one without considering all the others.
And is it, and you're about as expert of a CIO, CTO that I know of in K-12, Lenny. And is it just that school districts are not thinking this way in terms of laying out an architecture that can solve these problems? Because, and it's more like sort of what George was saying, which is, I get the call on Friday afternoon, and on Monday we have to have data from so-and-so, and so we need some way to Band-Aid that together, whatever that is.
It goes back to that role, and I can't remember who was talking about the role of IT has forever been changed. And we're not the department you call to create the report, right? We now need to be in these integration conversations with the school leadership, with our curriculum instruction department, to help map out what that vision is going to be, because it isn't an IT problem anymore. That vision is only going to be a reality when all of these departments are coming together to collaboratively say, where do we need to go, right? And start laying that line in the sand. And I think that's why districts are struggling. This is not an IT problem. This is a district problem that requires district strategy, district vision, and district commitment to say, here is what we're going to do. Now just tell us how long it's going to take and what our sprints are going to look like and how we're improving along the way. But paint that picture and show us how it's going to get done. That isn't an IT problem.
Yeah, but you can talk about it in IT. You can talk about them, but not without them. As they say. So that's there. Rob, one of the other things that I think is a stumbling block. I tend to be more philanthropic than I should be now that I'm on, quote, the dark side, and not in the school district anymore. But what I think every company needs to be able to, to feed their children and make money. But some of the things that I do see are people who conform to standards, but then they want to monetize that data, with other vendors in order to have an integration piece. I see this, and I'm not, and there are some single sign-on people who do that. There are some SISs who say, if you want access to the API, we have a one roster API, but if you want access as another vendor, then this is how much it's going to cost you. And some of that, again, there's cost to develop that, but once the standard's in place, this idea of monetizing each other to the detriment of the school system, I think is not a good look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point, George. We run into that quite a bit as well. I think their district leaders can play a large role in helping those who do want to monetize those feeds to open up a bit and help us faster overcome those connectivity challenges.
Right. I just don't understand the whole concept of charging for access to data that you don't own.
Right. That's the line in the sands that I think districts have to put down, and they're non-negotiable, right? And you're either going to work with us or you're not. But here is our line in the sand, and that only can happen by a district putting that down.
Yeah, I'll say we have something in IMS we created called the Standards First Pledge, which is really all about being transparent about those things, because we first feel that the first step is there needs to be transparency, and we need to be able to hold, because I find that many times people don't even understand exactly what they're paying for or not paying for, or what, sometimes they clearly do and sometimes they don't, and it's a bit of a gray area in the sense that certainly any product organization company is, has the right certainly to be charging for what they think is valuable, but we're hoping that that would be more functionality versus just, as you guys are saying, selling your data back to you. Basically selling your data back to you, so you could use your data for other things, but it's actually your data. So I agree, we need a lot of work there, to kind of move this forward. How about student data privacy? We only got about 4 minutes left, and I know that that's a big issue, for all of you, in terms of you feel you have a role to play there. And how do you think products like yours, or even other products, should be supporting the student data privacy mandate or importance in K-12?
One of the things that we're doing is anybody can sign the SDPC agreement, especially a salesperson, right? Yeah, I'm happy to sign that. So one of the things that we do is we have third-party audits, industry standard audits like SOC 2 and ISO audits that come in, so that school districts have a comfort level that we're looking at, where we're having somebody look at it besides ourselves. The other thing that I'm seeing, and it's cropped up in like a half a dozen times this week, is ensure, and this isn't really around privacy, it's more around security, but more and more school districts are having to go to MFA because the insurance companies won't insure them unless they have some kind of MFA built in. So, I mean, we provide that several different ways, but, and I'm sure the ID Auto folks probably do that as well. But again, it's more security than privacy, but still, it's coming. But
Okay.
Gavin, wouldn't you agree?
I totally agree. I think that, the requirements for hardening cybersecurity over the next few years are going to be, I think, stunning for anyone who's not focused in that area. And I think equally important will be new mandates related to data privacy. And I think that what will come is more user control over data privacy, because it's a double-edged sword. And I think the parents in particular need to become aware of that double-edged sword. On one hand, you don't want data free flowing out in the internet on your child, let's say, but at the same time, enabling districts to have data and send data that can help personalize their online learning experience, that can be pretty powerful as well. And I think we have to think about collectively both sides of that coin.
Yeah, that's what they're doing with the GDPR. I'm sorry, Robert.
Sorry. So it comes back to the IT department playing that role of vetting apps and looking at resources available. Like IMS Global has a resource now to vet applications for privacy and being able to tap into that. But it means that there's a lot more work that is in the lap of IT department to vet apps for privacy and security. And so one of the things we came up with recently, something called PII Shield, is to be able to give the IT department the ability to block PII data from being shared with that third-party vendor. And that way, you don't have to be vetting 100% of all your vendors. You may be vetting 20%. You touch the PII versus the 80% that don't. Block the PII data, anonymize the data. So you really lower the risk in terms of sharing data that is non-PII data with those vendors. Making sure the vendors don't collect PII data, that's the other part of it. So, but there's going to be innovative tools coming to market soon that will help streamline this whole process.
Right.
Rob, sorry, the one thing that I wanted to emphasize here for IT departments is, just like we've been talking about the collaboration that has to occur with other departments on LMS and the ecosystem, cybersecurity is not just an IT problem. Cybersecurity is a district problem, right? And Robert, while there are tools like you talked about that will assist the IT department, this is a much broader conversation. So when you talk about data privacy, I think the challenge for IT leaders is, how do I now get awareness and accountability in the other departments out there so they understand what their role is. How do I improve awareness, right? So I think the cybersecurity aspect of this is, from an IT perspective, yeah, we need to be looking at the improvements, the innovations on the bits and the bytes. But I honestly believe the biggest challenge is, how do I make people understand this is not just an IT problem? It's a district problem with shared accountability. And what does shared accountability mean as far as the other departments' roles and responsibilities? That's a huge challenge right now.
Well, thank you, Lenny. That was a great way to end our session because we're out of time. And I just want to say thanks to the panel. It was very, very informative. It's almost like we've done this before, and maybe we'll do it again sometime. Who knows? But it was very informative. I want to thank the viewers for tuning in, and we'll see you back here next time. And IMS Global Learning Consortium and Learning Impact. But thank you, panel. See you later.
Thank you.
See everybody.
Thanks. Bye.